background will be delighted to receive that, John. Thank you. So I don't quite know what happens next. Of course, there needs to be an opportunity for people to make their remarks or to ask their questions, and then, of course, there's possibility that there aren't any. So why don't I just sit down and create a little bit of silence, and in about 30 seconds from now I'll get up again unless one of you do it.
Yeah. I've got a question for Grant. Kia ora, Grant. Mike is my name. I'm interested, I haven't read the book yet, but I've heard a lot about it, and great reviews, I'm sure, that I've been getting, so I totally trust those. But reflecting on the context of the conversations, 1825, and the effects on the participants of the conversation, and seeing what unfolded after that at Parihaka and then around the country. Interested on your views or your thoughts on how things changed for Māori from 1825 to Parihaka in 1881, the Te Whiti.
And I mean, that's a crucial space of the changes. And it's enormous, but it is all connected, I think. Reading the journals and letters of Richard Davis, who'd come as an agriculturalist with some quite strange, quite foreign, quite alien ideas about spreading manure on land that you then grew food crops on, for instance. And he got wheat growing eventually as a proof of concept. He built a mill, he imported millstones, he dammed a little stream behind the mission station at Waimate. Darwin comes along in 1835 with Fitzroy and says, it's like a magician's
Enchanter's wand.
Enchanter's wand, you know, and here's a whole English village here. But behind the geese and the daffodils was the infrastructure, the industrial infrastructure needed to turn wheat, which when first grown by Ruatara over at Rangahau, Māori were pulling out of the ground to see, well, where's the kumara at the bottom? You know? No, nothing. This is hopeless kind of food, you know. And he imported cotton sacks to put the flour in. Davis. He got the Dorset system of agriculture working in Waimate to replace the staple which had been fern root. He then motivated the community over at Kaikoi to get their own mill set up and to get their own fields ploughed and producing wheat, to the extent that by adding 55, this idea and this infrastructure, this whole concept of a wage economy, a cash economy, had spread so that Auckland was being fed by the Tainui at the hem of their gown, their cloak. And I think over that period too, certain ideas from the Bible were being absorbed, certain values, certain relocations, I think, of the ideas of reciprocity that Utu sometimes gets misrepresented, I think, in books and words like the Musket Wars. I think the Musket Wars is a bit of a misleading thing that you might as well have called all of Napoleon's wars the Cannon Wars, you know. we're better off calling them the Napoleonic Wars because who was involved. But it gets used, musket wars gets used as a justification that, well, you know, they were busy killing each other, so we might as well take their land off them, you know, by some of the next generation down from the Christian ministries. You know, William Gilbert Pucky's son, Edward Walter, marries Annie Russell, who's the sister of Thomas Russell, who sends the British army down to take over the Tainui land and Henry Williams, one of his sons, brings down a whole lot of cattle to feed the British Army as they go down the Waikato to steal Tainui land, basically. And the injustice of all of this is kind of whitewashed over amongst the Pakeha settler community as we're so busy building our churches and turning from a missionary, evangelical, transformative culture, piece of social action, to a defensive, we now own this land kind of mindset. But these ideas have grown and spread in the undergrowth, you know. Pucky notices at one point, he goes and visits villages around the Hokianga, possibly up to Mitimiti, and finds all these warriors, they're sitting there reading already. They've got little pieces of scripture and they've taught each other to read. One of and Pompilio
did a lot of that was printing
So,
works. He printed the scripture for
Yeah.
them and it went out to them.
and so the reading sort of spread like wildfire, and transformed the culture because people were reading and seeing the story of Daniel in the lion's den and transforming that into meaning for themselves. And at Parihaka, you know, this whole idea of passive resistance, that
And we're here in Dunedin, of course, Parihaka is only just being recognised properly now. And I remember coming down with the kids when they were younger and saying, oh, you know, we're going up to Portobello, and we said, oh, this was built by Parihaka, you know, and the whole sad story.
Yeah.
And it's
The
very much
connection.
there, it's there. And yeah, we need to acknowledge that history very much.
And we do need to go and ask that mountain.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
and the kids in schools need to be able to free to choose whether it's art history or whether it's New Zealand history. They need to be able to go and do projects
And see it.
and dig it up and dig up the fossils and find for themselves what the meaning is.
Because it is all there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just hasn't been, it's only recently been some places. Sort of, you can find it if you know where to look.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah.
But the really heartening thing is the beginning of this year, the big hikoi to Parliament, you know, and I went along with my daughter and my granddaughter, and the crowds were full of the energy to say, we're not having any of this bullshit.
Yeah,
You know?
it's lovely to be in that space, wasn't it? Yeah, I was.
So it is all connected. You're quite right to make all those.
I'm just wondering whether you're thinking the 60 years between the conversation and Parihaka as a very binary of responding to violence, one of the parts of the binary was inevitable. Whether what Te Whiti did was inevitable. In terms of the sequencing of, how do we respond to violence?
Did the missionary pacifism pass on those 56 years?
Yep.
That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, Henry Williams was careful in the conversation to say, if the others come and fight you, you're okay to fight back. But I think what he was saying is, I don't think, in his words, we can see Parihaka. Parihaka, I think, is a deep growth of an idea from within Maori culture and Maori community,
Is
which
the second book coming?
well, I have to write the first and the second yet. This one came out first because this was so tightly focused. The first, book number one is actually about William Paki's father going to Tahiti in 1797, and his journal is in the Alexander Turnbull Library, and it's a fascinating, sometimes not credible, but it's I think a very interesting other example of a primary source of a young man discovering himself as he discovers another culture. And I think that's part of the environment that William Gilbert Paki grows up in, and possibly gets some words, but certainly get some idea about respecting a mana and respecting another culture, and not going in guns blazing saying we're better than you, so do what we say, And I think that coloured the early evangelical missionaries in Kirikiri. What was the right way to go about trying to engage? And we're still learning to engage, really, aren't we? As a Pakeha culture, we're still trying to figure out how do we deal with all this stuff. So really good question, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
And John, thank you for your contribution. Okay.
We done?
Any other comments people want to make?
Shows how little I know.
Let's declare our conversation finished, and then if folk want to hang around and converse nonetheless, they can.